Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Time. I'm going to quickly again. Yep, I think we're good with the mics, but you know what? Like I said earlier, we've unplugged everything and plugged everything back in. Usually, we've got to do one cycle through every show just to make sure that the shows are successful in dealing with it. But I'm going to assume that the bad thing to assume, but I'm going to assume we have sound and everything is going well. So welcome to Overtime. The National Weather Service is saying that southern New England is going to get struck with, quote, a high-impact weather storm late Friday or early Saturday. The storm is expected to bring a foot or more and blizzard-like conditions in the region. It's been described... I don't believe it's entering. Yeah, so let's really don't joke about that. It's been described as basically a snowstorm, except with blizzard-like conditions, which is well in excess of what we normally see in, say, a nor'easter even. So it's looking pretty good. Well, they're calling it now. They're going to say it is a bomb cyclone. Yet more militarization of our weather. Which happens when the central pressure of a storm drops by 24 millibars or more in a 24-hour period. This creates a wind rush towards the center of the storm, which drags moisture into the storm. And if the air is cold enough, you get basically blizzard-like conditions. As much as 17 inches are predicted south of Boston, closer to... only about 3 inches in, say, New Haven, Connecticut, but they're still working on the model. But they're also expecting a lot of ice, a lot of power outages, so we're going to be keeping an eye on that. Under mounting pressure to retire, while Democrats still control the Senate, the oldest-serving Supreme Court Justice, Stephen Breyer, plans to formally announce his retirement tomorrow after more than 20 years on the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court justices must, of course, be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Famously, Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, widely considered a moderate, to the U.S. Supreme Court in March of 2016 to fill the vacancy left by the death of Justice Anton Scalia. Mitch McConnell, a Republican that we are all unfortunately way too familiar with, declared that in his view, any appointment by the sitting president, and I'm going to ask you to mute Joe just because we're hearing the keyboard and any vacancy left by, any appointment by the sitting president would be null and void, and he should wait until after the year's elections. Quote, one of my proudest moments is when I looked at Barack Obama in the eye and said, Mr. President, you will not fill this Supreme Court vacancy, McConnell said in a speech in his home state in Kentucky. This move gave Trump an extra nominee, considered by many to be stolen, and gave Trump a supermajority in the court. My first choice, if I had any choice whatsoever in this nomination, my first choice would be Merrick Garland. I would remind people that for 82 days of the Garland nomination, each day, every day, without fail, I would tweet directly at the President of the United States and remind him gently that he could actually appoint Garland by fiat. Because, as they say, and important, and I would expect him to have known this, qui tacet consentire vidite. Viditetur. My Latin isn't so good. It was my view that he should just by fiat put him on the bench, and he could have. But past that, and whereas Garland is already in a position preparing the case of the United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, I propose my own modest choice of a man, a constitutional teacher and scholar, graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University and was head of the Harvard Law Review with decades of experience in both the executive and legislative branches of both federal and state governments, the eminently and most qualified former president of the United States, Barack Obama. However, the White House says that Biden will stand by his pledge to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. Titan Uranus, the head moderator of the YouTube channel In Time, nominated that channel's assistant head moderator, Maya, for appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the host, Nicholas Lamar Soutter, of the $400 suit variety, seconded the motion. Maya was not informed prior to this broadcast, and this may be her first hearing of it, and there is, of course, no word yet on her chances from the Biden administration. Dustin Thompson, one of the Capitol Hill rioters, currently on trial for his role in the assault on the Capitol, accused of illegally entering the Capitol and stealing a coat rack, has indicated that he intends to call Donald J. Trump as a witness to testify in his defense. U.S. Federal Judge Reggie Walton has said at present that he does not support the move, saying that there's nothing that Trump could provide that isn't part of the public record already, and it would turn the court into a sideshow circus. And What does he think this is? The steps of Congress? Reports that last night on social media, Joe Biden issued orders for the American troops to deploy to the Ukraine were somewhat inaccurate, and this was going around on a couple places, especially Twitter. There is no word on whether he will sign it or not, but there is he instructed an order be sent, written up to send up to 8,000 troops to NATO to operate in that area. We don't know how they would be used. So far, all of our aid to the Ukraine has been non-lethal. At any rate, Ukraine is now saying that they believe the invasion is imminent, and we'll be discussing that, I think, at length. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has told both NATO and Russia in writing that he unilaterally rejects Russian demands to ban the Ukraine from NATO, to block former Soviet republics from entering the alliance, and to redeploy NATO troops back to their 1973 boundaries. He said that these positions were non-negotiable, while the Secretary of State said, quote, there is no change, there will be no change in regards to NATO policies, nor would there be any negotiation between the U.S. and nor would there be any negotiation in the U.S. and European response should Russia choose to invade the Ukraine. While this response was entirely predicted, this is basically a chess match, and all of these are the steps that we thus far knew were going to happen. He was going to issue something we could not give into, and we were going to reply no, and then he would make his next move, which we expect tomorrow, will be him denouncing the U.S. and NATO for refusing to even negotiate on his opening terms. So he has said that there will be retaliatory measures if this is rejected, and we'll get into all of that. Highlighting the divide in the United States over strategies to battle COVID, concerns grew over Thursday's deadline for healthcare workers in about half the states in the initial rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for healthcare workers under the Biden administration. The concern is that a number of healthcare workers in the medical system, which is already understaffed, people are falling sick, they are quitting. Fatigue and is extraordinarily high. Morale is extremely low. And they've been spread thin by the Omicron surge, that many of them would actually rather quit at this point than get the vaccine, citing COVID fatigue. COVID-19 booster drives in the U.S. have lost considerable momentum. The number of booster shots dispensed per day has fallen from its peak of 1 million just a little over a month ago to less than half that last week, with only 40% of Americans who have gotten their booster shot, despite warnings that the first two shots are all but ineffective against Omicron. A poll from the Associated Press finds that most Americans think that it's the initial vaccines rather than the booster which is essential. Only 47% of Americans say that the booster is actually necessary in order to fully participate in public life without being at risk for COVID. I'll skip the Senate thing. That's a minor one. The divide, meanwhile, between those who believe in science and those who do not is growing. Faith in science is falling in the Republican demographics while rising steadily in Democratic circles, according to a study conducted at the University of Chicago. It is the largest gap since the study started in 1972. Quote, we are living in a time when people would rather put urine or cleaning chemicals into their body than scientifically vetted vaccines, said University of Georgia professor Marshall Shepard. This is a clear convergence of fear, lack of critical thinking, confirmation bias, and political tribalism. Douglas Brinkley, a historian at Rice University, says that science used to be something that all Americans could actually get behind. He said, quote, we now see it falling prey to the great partisan divide. The world of science should be a meeting house where right and left can agree on data. Instead, it's become a sharp razor's edge of conflict. 20 years ago, Republicans actually had a greater belief in science than Democrats, with the percentage of people saying that they were confident that in the results of the scientific community hovering around 45%. That trend continued until 2006, when there was a sharp decline in conservatives, and since 2018, it has continued to decline. 64% of Democrats today say that they have a great deal of confidence in the scientific community. Less than 34% of Republicans agree. The federal trial of 3 Minneapolis police officers in the death of George Floyd continues. A paramedic said that nobody informed him that George Floyd was not breathing and had no pulse. either when they requested the ambulance or upgraded the urgency of the call, or even when he arrived. He said that when he got there and asked for a status update, he was simply told, quote, "We're just basically restraining him until you guys get here." He said that he could not find a pulse. The pupils were large, suggesting that the patient had probably already been deceased. And once inside the ambulance, they were unable to find any electrical impulses in Floyd's heart. Derek Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes while Floyd was handcuffed, face down, and unable to breathe. San Jose, California today voted to require all gun owners to carry liability insurance in what is believed to be the very first law of its kind in the United States. The insurance would cover loss, damage as a result of accidental discharge and from theft, so long as the theft is reported to authorities. The cost of this insurance would be reduced for homeowners who demonstrated that they had practiced proper safety protocols, including using gun safes and or gun locks. People who don't get this insurance would be subject to a yearly fine. Opponents say that this is tantamount to taxing a constitutional right and will not reduce crime. Meanwhile, Los Angeles has decided that they are going to phase out oil drilling and have directed the city's attorney to draft an ordinance which would prohibit all oil and gas drilling in Los Angeles and phase out current existing wells, although I will admit I didn't realize there were any in Los Angeles, so I'm a little curious as to how and where that is. And the Federal Reserve today has signaled that they plan to raise interest rates as soon as March in an attempt to reverse policies which have fueled hiring and growth but escalated inflation. And we can talk about that, but they're sort of getting down to the nuts and bolts of that. We have obviously the Dow is bouncing around a lot. It's which one is it? There is an index here. One of the lesser known indexes, and I can't seem to find it, that has actually gone off. It's of smaller businesses. It's gone off by about 30%. The S&P 500 is off by about 10% from the beginning of the year. And the International Monetary Fund cut its forecasted growth of the U.S. economy from 5.2% to 4%, which sounds kind of small, but actually it represents a 36% reduction in the overall growth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the news for the week. Joe, how are you?
Good. I actually want to hit that inflation deal you just said first, and the reaction to it. So here's the thing that kind of drives me nuts. So business people, and particularly in the right wing, they've been screaming about inflation. Okay, fine. So now that downgrade in growth. See, the thing is that growth and inflation kind of go hand in hand, at least to a degree. So slowing the economy down, that's actually one way to stave off inflation, and raising interest rates can do that, and that's what it does. It basically, by increasing the interest rates, basically this chokes off the available cash for investment. So to kind of slow things down. So it's like, well, so what does the market want? It's like it wants very high growth with no inflation. That's not going to happen. Plus the fact that where I still get kind of frustrated with the whole thing is that the inflation we have now. I mean, inflation generally happens when the supply of money outstrips the supply of goods, and which is happening now. But it's not because we're printing money or the usual things. It's because we have the shortages, and the shortages are created by, or as a artifact of COVID and the early treatment of, and they see the fact that COVID's been going on for so long. So it's not. It's inflation. It's real inflation, but it's not caused by the usual suspects. So it's just. I mean, there's really no way around it. I mean, either you do take things to cut the inflation and be happy, and then understand that that's going to slow the growth a bit, or you just let it run rampant. So take your pick. Either one is bad. So which one's the least bad? That's all. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. The mute didn't respond rapidly when I told it. So, do you think the Federal Reserve? And there's obviously an argument, usually on conservative sides, that the Federal Reserve should try to make a lot fewer of these decisions in general. And while it's great that they can and do have the power to respond to an economic crisis, oftentimes what happens is, they respond to it, but their response pulls the rubber band back and causes, or at least is a large contributing factor in the next crisis. If, for example, they hadn't cut the rates so low for so long in the first place, we'd have less of this problem here right now. So do you think they should stay out of it more, or just realize that there are consequences?
Well, I mean, I was with them up until that last part. So the thing is that and certainly the rates were low, but we're basically trying to, because we were in an economic crisis. So those are extenuating circumstances. I kind of agree that they should do this less often, maybe not per quarter, maybe 3 times a year, maybe twice a year, unless there's an emergency that they have to respond to. I remember probably, I guess it would have been the 90s, because I remember I was driving to Berkeley Heights. So we're talking 93, 94 timeframe. And we were trying to coming out of the 91 recession, and they were just constantly just fiddling. It's like, give the economy a chance to do something. There's something, and actually, as from my job, I do automation and controls, and there is such thing as overcorrecting, where sometimes, if you let a system go, if you make adjustments slowly, sometimes the system will, it may overshoot, but it'll come back and then kind of oscillate down toward the mean. Sometimes you kind of have to let it do that. So I don't think that's one of the few times I actually agree with the conservatives, but they probably overdo it sometimes. I think they need to be prepared to take action in an emergency, like I said, when you have COVID or something like that, where you just have to make an adjustment, preemptively. But I think they probably should lay off more than they do, because it definitely does. Because unfortunately, the market reacts, even if they don't change rates, just because they said something, the market reacts. And the shitty part is, and this is something I noticed like 25 years ago, that there's certain rules of thumb that have developed over history. Some of them were true, probably most of them were probably true at one time. Some of them are probably not true anymore, but because that's the rote thing, people respond as if it's going to happen. It's like kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they would just leave well enough, and I don't mean the Fed right now. I'm talking about just the market. If the market would just kind of lay off, sometimes it's like you're there, because the market anticipates, and this is the reason why the market will react more down to negative news or positive news that's not positive enough more than it'll go up on good news or less negative news. Yep. So, and actually, I haven't done it in a while, but I used to trade options. And so I used to play on that, because you could count on the downswings more than you could count on the upswings. But yeah, I think that, everybody needs to chill, because a lot of the things that made those rules of thumb work those situations aren't in place anymore.
All right. Well, so you also seemed like you noted the gun law, which I think is interesting. So this is sort of an interesting approach. It's almost the kind of the healthcare approach, right? Which is, no, you don't have to have healthcare, but you're going to get fined if you don't. And this is, look, you're going to have insurance. Which we do that with automobiles too, which is most states require that you have insurance if you're going to be driving. So right. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, because again, it's liability insurance. And so this idea that it's a tax on just ownership. Well, no, and it's just like your auto insurance, right? If you have a good driving record, you pay less. So here, if you demonstrate that you are in fact a responsible gun owner, then your insurance requirements and fees will be much less. And it's really to help create compliance, because that's the thing. I mean, if all the gun owners that we had were actually responsible gun owners, we wouldn't have anywhere near the problem that we have. But the problem is a lot of people are not responsible. So this is where we are. And again, no right is absolute. The fact that you're saying, okay, you have to, because again, the insurance is not on the gun. The insurance is on your behavior with your guns.
That's an interesting distinction. I'll say this, though. Remember, too, that a Pew study found that very much like driving, that it turns out that 75 to 83% of gun owners are, in fact, above average in their safety and responsibility with a gun. Think about that statistic for a minute. 85% of gun owners are above average in their, it's like, what is it? 85% of drivers are above average drivers. Okay. So, and we,
no, that's possible. But that would mean that the 15% that are below average are really, really freaking bad.
We're really, yeah. Well, I mean, that would be in terms of total accidents, but in terms of actual skill, only 50% can be above average. I think only 50% of gun owners can be above average in terms of safety.
No, that's not true, because averages are weighted. So for instance, and I always point this out too with people when it comes to height. So if there's if there's three guys who are 5 foot tall, one guy who's 6 foot tall, so what's the average going to be? So it's going to be like
have three below average and one above.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And and I have to do the math, and my brain's not working right now. So yeah, your average would be 5'3".
Yep. Okay, so three below, one above. Yeah. All right. Well, so I'll have to keep that example in mind. I like that one. So I'll have to remember the four guys. So all right. Well, what else did you want to talk about?
Well, I think the big one is, of course, the judicial nomination. Which, and the thing is, some people have said, well, it doesn't really gain the left much because Breyer is already on the left. And that's true to a point, but he has voted with the right at times. He's not 100% reliable. He's more reliable than Roberts is for the right wing, because Roberts has probably voted with us about 20%, 25% of the time. There's still room to be had. And one thing, I want to jump on real quick. We talked about it before the show. This idea, because of course Fox News is going nuts because Biden says he wants to nominate a black woman. And this is discrimination, which this is so insulting that I can't even begin. Because on a couple levels, just on the demographic issue. I went and looked up because the thing is, they always say, well, it shouldn't matter. The race shouldn't matter. Just be the best person. Of course, they never say that. If Biden says, I'm gonna nominate a white guy, nobody would say, well, we got to make sure we get the best person. They would assume that was going to be somebody qualified. So I went and looked it up. The first black person that ever became a lawyer in the United States passed the bar in 1844. That's 177 years ago. The first black woman to pass the bar was in 1872. That's 149 years. So what people want to tell me that there's been only two qualified black men or black people of any gender or anatomical sex in 177 years, and no women in 149. No black women, none? Really? Bullshit. Bullshit. There's been a quota, and the quota has largely been male and white, because Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman, and that was in the 80s. So what's interesting now, 3 of the 5 women that have served on the court are on the court right now. And one, Ginsburg just having died a couple of years ago. And women are 52% of the population. So again, you can't tell me there's only been 5 qualified women in, 220 years or 230 years, whatever it is. So, or that's 246. Yeah, time flies. So the other thing too is that when somebody nominates based on ideology, whether we agree with the ideology that they're putting forward, we all get that there's going to be ideological selections for the court. And we kind of depend on it, actually. Well, when you nominate somebody of a ethnicity that is not the common one, you're going to get differences in ideology. You're going to get differences of ways of thinking, even with left, right. Because if you look at the black community, the people that are on the left in the black community, I find that the attitudes are very different than than liberals on the whole, progressives on the whole, because we have different experience. Same thing with Hispanics, and there's only been one Hispanic on the court ever in 246 years. So to me, this is no different. That we're basically looking for a different perspective. And this is one that represents, again, we're 1/8, slightly more than 1/8 of the population. We'll actually be slightly overrepresented on the court, 2 black people. Oh my God. But of course, the previous, how many we basically had Thurgood Marshall and we had Clarence Thomas, and that's it in all the years of the courts. So this idea that this is somehow reverse racism, reverse discrimination, people who think that should, look in the mirror and really consider who they are, or they should just fuck themselves.
Well, actually, you bring up an interesting point, because this got me thinking. Okay. So wait a minute. You framed it in an interesting way. So let me posit something, which is actually, if it wasn't for quotas, would we ever have had Trump for president? Because if Trump had been black, he certainly would not have I think, made it in. I don't think liberals would have voted for him, even if he had a more liberal ideology. Let's assume he was back to his more liberal days. Liberals certainly wouldn't have voted for him because of any number of reasons, being unqualified certainly being among them. And I don't think, even with his ideology, if he had been black, it had been voted for by conservatives. So really, it was that he filled the white quota, is what it kind of seems to me. So I think that's
exactly. He basically, he just had to show up, and they had to think, he had to be white, and they had to think he had money. And think about all the stuff he said, all the crazy stuff. I mean, they went after Obama because he wore a tan suit, as if that was, a black mark on the presidency, no pun intended.
Well, and literally, let me add, because he put Grey Poupon on his hamburger, and
exactly.
That was an issue. But
Trump could do all manner of horrible thing and say all manner of horrible thing. You don't know that you all can say there hasn't been an openly trans justice, and I hope that one day we will, and I hope we don't have to wait another century for that to happen. But we'll see. But I definitely would support if he wanted to put a trans or open trans person on that. Hell yeah, why not? Because again, trans people have been beyond the 8 ball since before we were a country.
If there was a condition placed on it that the current administration would pick one justice and the next administration would pick the next justice, and it would have to be the next administration. So Democrat or Republican, and Biden administration would only get one pick. But if one pick for this administration, one pick for the next administration, what would you think about expanding the court by 2, and why?
Well, I mean, in general, I remember seeing an argument that up until, and I don't know what year it was, but the tradition had been one judge for each circuit plus one. And when we got away from that a long time ago, so it would actually make sense if we, I forget how many circuits there are, but I think it would actually require adding 4 or 5 judges to equal the number of circuits plus one. So I think that would be fine. Because if anything, you will moderate the court, period. Because the more people you have on, the likelihood of any court being overly liberal, overly conservative is not likely to happen. And then it mutes what impact any individual justice can do,
and I think any individual president.
And any individual president. That's right, because obviously, you're limiting, what an administration can put up. So I think that would be good overall. And then what happens is the court, the liberalness or conservativeness of the court would represent the broader society at any, over time. So, and that's good for that matter. We've never had an Asian on the court. Why not? Asian people live here too. They should be represented. And so that's the thing. I don't consider it a quota. It's basically, because again, we're not saying just anybody just to fill a ticket, punch a ticket. We're saying, they have to be a qualified person. But as I pointed out, I gotta believe that in the long time span that it's been possible, that there have been plenty of qualified people that were passed over because of anti-quotas or quotas in favor of white people. So, or in favor of men, for that matter. So, the whole thing that it's reverse discrimination is horseshit. Hey, for anybody who's amenable, it's reparations.
Oh, well, okay. So that's not going to trigger anybody. Well, and so I think you're right. I think if you expand the court, you make it less vulnerable to this kind of thing, and you make it so that when there is a nomination, it doesn't bring the whole fucking government to a halt, because instead of 1 out of 7, 1 out of 9, 1 of however many, and I understand the desire to not increase the number on the court for any number of reasons, but it does dilute the power of those who are there, and it dilutes the impact of this kind of thing. So far, every time the court's been expanded, it's been actually explicitly to pack the court, because if we expand the court by 2, you get 2 nominees, and since it didn't take out you're not replacing anybody, you can quite easily pack the court by expanding it. So I was thinking of, and then the only other thing is, I think the conservative argument is, well, you should pick the best person for the job regardless, not someone who's qualified, but the best person. But that then also, I think, as a counter to that argument would be, well, hold on, though, the best person by what measure? And if it's just based on grades, if it's just based on this or that, but is it not also life experience? Isn't, especially for a judge, life experience a huge part of it? And so if they're all qualified, isn't it up to the judge, not the judge, up to the President of the United States to determine what makes someone actually the best candidate available? And it's not necessarily just what's on paper. I don't know. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. Plus the fact, as an employer, I've come to learn this idea of the best candidate. I mean, you may have someone may be the best in a particular pool that you're looking at, but the idea that there's one person who's the absolute best fit is kind of crap.
That never really happens, right? There's always and especially when I was teaching high school, and whenever we were looking at a new teacher candidate, nobody agrees on who's the best. It's all by different qualifications, and they're all qualified, but then and nobody's happy with whoever we pick because there is no consensus on what constitutes the best. So that's a really good point. Yeah. All right, where are we going on to next? Unless there was something else, I didn't want to cut you off there. But.
I guess Ukraine, because obviously that's the.
Oh dear Lord! Yeah.
Yep.
So there was. Yeah, please.
So I guess have we established? I saw something earlier this evening that said, I guess, a total of 1,000 NATO forces were going. And I wasn't sure what their composition. I hadn't seen anything that said what their composition was or anything like that.
Well, so I haven't seen much about that. I've seen a bit. I'm ignoring almost all of that, and the reason is that's bullshit. And I think Putin has to know that's bullshit. For the most part, I don't see any set of circumstances where we are going to get into a war with Russia over Ukraine, whether we should or should not decide. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we will do sanctions. I think we will guard the border so they don't go past it. But we would have to put people in Ukraine in harm's way, and if they shoot and hit any Americans during that, we're gonna have a problem. There's going to be treaties involved, and it's essentially an act of war. It's one of the reasons why we could not bomb Cuba when they were putting up missiles to attack the U.S., because those missiles were manned by Russians, and even though we'd be attacking a different country, if we knowingly kill a whole bunch of Soviets, we were going to have a problem. So I don't think we're ready to start a war with Russia over it. I think we are ready to protect the border so they don't go any further. But the real question is, so a group of Ukrainian security analysts published an article in the Ukrainskaya Pravda saying that they believed actually a full-scale military of the Ukraine is highly unlikely. And we had on Commander Lance McMillan of the Navy, who has experienced a lot of this kind of thing. And he said, too, that he believes it's highly unlikely. They said that what they expected was either a hybrid invasion, an escalation of cyber attacks, disinformation and propaganda campaigns to try to get to destabilize it and maybe try to get at it through alternate means, critical infrastructure sabotage, as well as terrorist attacks with the same goal, either putting some form of psychological strain on the Ukrainian military by constantly doing this until you start to get mass defections from the stress and other just general collapse of that. And then the one that I think is probably the most likely at this point, and I think is actually really the end goal, is an invasion, but only of the Donbas area. and trying to take eastern Ukraine. They're going to argue that, well, there's a war in Donbass already. There are rebels there. They're trying to secede. We are trying to give them their freedom, and they will ignore the fact that they've been paying the rebels, supporting the rebels, and basically trying to find a reason to go in there. So my suspicion is they'll go in, but only into that area. And we have to decide whether or not we're going to start a war over it. The only country that has, the UK has been assisting, like we all have, like NATO has Ukraine, but usually it's training and military hardware that is non-lethal, so transports, stuff like that. Nothing that can actually be used to cause direct injury. I suppose you could hit somebody with the transport if you wanted to. Don't go there. Let's not equivocate and give me a hard time about that one. But last week, or actually I think it was earlier this week, the UK said that they will now start to give lethal hardware to Ukraine. It's only for defense. It is anti-armor weaponry designed to penetrate armor on tanks and so on and so forth. But it is the first lethal hardware that anyone has sent over there. And I think we've been trying to avoid that. And it's interesting. I'm curious if what's his name's troubles over there, if he's trying to distract from the fact that he's probably about to get kicked out of the prime minister's office by doing this. But either way, it's a bold move. I think they're going to go in, but I don't think they're going to go past the Donbass. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, I'm not sure if they'll go in or how far they'll go. But again, I think part of, as I think I said last time, I think whether or not they go in is really going to be dependent on what we and the rest of NATO do in regards to, showing our willingness to defend or unwillingness to defend Ukraine one way or another, whether it's material or whether we actually send troops or not. Because here's the thing: Russia doesn't want a war with us either. So I think if we do put troops, this is why I really feel like if we did put troops in Ukraine, they don't want to kill American troops and have the potential for that to escalate. I really don't think they do. They'd like to swallow up Ukraine bit by bit. Like I said, you may be right about Donbass, because again, and then the next time it'll be some more, and next time it'll be some more. But I think, personally, I don't think we should allow that. And I think we'll be less likely to get into a war if we put stuff in there now rather than wait until after. Because first off, it's always harder to do that. And secondly, then we're the ones who have to worry about, are we killing Russians and all this. So now, one thing I will say, though, I don't think it's automatic that if either side kills troops from the other, that means that, it all goes to hell. Bo of the Fifth Column did a really good video about the Pueblo Incident. Mm-hmm. There have been other times when it's happened as well. I had another example and I lost it. I should have written it down. But and then we also know that there were a lot of close calls during the Cold War. And actually, you mentioned the Cuban. Actually, you mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis. Technically, the blockade was an act of war. Blockade is technically an act of war.
Yeah, well, it depends. I guess it depends on. Excuse me, we did not blockade them. We quarantined them. It was a medical situation. There was medical grade. What the concern was that there was medical grade depleted uranium coming in on, and regular uranium too, for that matter, coming in on, and we were very concerned. So it was not a blockade. It was a quarantine. But yes, it is. That's why. Of course, it had to be a quote quarantine.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, we called it a quarantine, but it was an actual
everybody
blockade.
Knows what it was. Yeah.
So that was technically an act of war in and of itself. And the fact that we turned, when we were turning and we turned back, the Russian ships, and actually, we were ready to fire at if they ran the blockade, we were ready to shoot at them. So they knew that. And I don't think, as much as we were on the brink, I don't think if we had fired on one of their transports, I don't believe that would have necessarily participated in a full-scale release. Neither side wanted to. Neither side really wanted to, because it wasn't going to end well for either of us. In retrospect, looking at the situation, it probably would have ended up a lot worse for the Soviets, because they had a lot fewer operational missiles than we were led to believe, and certainly a lot fewer than we had. So, and we certainly had more ballistic missile subs. So it actually would have been, I remember seeing a thing that at one point, the different intelligence agencies were arguing with with one another and trying to get Kennedy, because some of them actually wanted him to release. They said, yeah, let's go for it, because basically saying, hey, look, they only have X amount of missiles, and we won't get hit that bad, and let's take them out and be done with it. And others said, no, they have a lot more. And Kennedy did not want to be the person responsible, because even in the low estimates, it was still going to be like 15-20% of the population was going to get killed. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to be that guy.
So Kennedy was against. Oh, wait, the liberal was against that? I don't. Wow,
against
okay.
that, yeah. The supposed communist. The right wing's always called them a communist, which again we know that they just called everybody they don't like a communist because it's just easier, and they're lazy and they're not very smart. But yeah. So I think though that Britain, the UK is doing the right thing. The one thing I thought of what the US could do, a lot of people may not realize this. I only discovered this recently because I haven't been keeping up. But the Ukraine has already purchased some of our older M1 tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And they were supposed to start getting delivered this year, but with this year we were only supposed to deliver 22 and then another 50 next year. But it's a total of a few hundred M1 tanks. I'll get that later. It's my sister who can use. So we could always advance that, just say, hey, we're going to bring them to you more quickly and send guys over to train them how to use them, because that would be a substantial improvement in their armor forces. And given the record of Soviet or former Soviet equipment versus the M1 tank in warfare. And while I've been told, okay, well, the Iraqis had the export versions and they're not as good. I mean, look, they're not. I think we need that massive of a difference, especially considering that the Republican Guard did have the better stuff, and we still trounced them too. So I think that would give the Russians pause. So I think that would be a good thing, and that wouldn't even require a lot of U.S. personnel, because we're just basically delivering stuff they were already planning delivering, and just the training forces to show them how to use these tanks. And it's not that different than what they're using. And actually, from talking to people who I know who have been in M1 tanks, it's actually fairly easier to operate than the tanks that came before it.
Well, and you reminded me, and I do agree. I think you brought up an interesting point. I'd forgotten about that, and I think that's a good point, which is that, I think instead of playing, okay, they won't cross outside the Ukraine because they don't want to shoot us, which I think is true, if we entered the Ukraine, that, would be able to flip that on its head and have the exact same effect, but it would reverse it. But that reminds me that actually Britain did send, in addition to their anti-armor, they did send a contingent of troops. So there are troops that are on their way. They're British troops that will be in Ukraine momentarily, and presumably, they're going to be in harm's way, and they may be able to help defend Ukraine. England has sent 30 elite special forces officers to help train and potentially be involved in combat. 30 military officers have been sent to the Ukraine from the UK, and I will say, okay, now I want to. Do they think they're Sparta? I mean, is this just like they're gonna take they're gonna put bayonets and they're gonna get into the phalanx, and the Russian army is gonna be coming up.
Well, I mean, if they're special forces, I mean that's not they're not gonna be sitting in foxholes. They're doing special warfare kind of stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was funny because it's just like, okay, it's 30 and it's newsworthy, so it's 30 UK special forces
because it's special forces. That's why. I mean, yeah. It's well, I mean, think about we all know about SEAL Team 6, right, and the stuff they did. Well, it's a similar kind of level of training. So basically they're sending the equivalent of three SEAL teams. That's not insubstantial, or maybe 2, I guess, because there's probably some tail into that teeth. But so that's they're there for special purposes, and that's fine. That will help. And one of the things that special forces do is training, and counterinsurgency. So that's the other thing too, is to try to get in. Like we know, like you said, there are insurgents in Ukraine right now, and so one of their things may be to help out stopping the insurgents, infiltrating them and destroying them.
And the false flags, if they really are trying to do false flags, it may not be a bad idea to try to get someone to stop that. But
exactly, because and the special forces team is very good at doing stuff like that.
All right, perfect. All right, well, so what's next? Let's see. Let me see if I can.
What else do we miss?
Well, it was just I think there was the snowstorm, which I think is just it's they really are. I mean, it's what is it? It's a bomb. They're really militarizing the weather. COVID, but it's just there's nothing spectacularly new. It's just that there's people that have concerns that, and I don't know how realistic they are. Bregwin pointed out, and I think this is true, that actually the vast majority are already actually vaccinated. Now we can't really afford to lose any more that are in. We can't lose more nurses and doctors. We need all of them. It's an all hands on deck kind of situation. But I have to believe that the numbers that we're talking about would be small, and I don't want it. But it's not a reason to certainly give up the mandates. But I mean, especially and when it comes to listen. The doctors come into contact with immunocompromised patients. They have to. That's part of the job. If you're immunocompromised, you have to see a doctor sometimes. You can stay inside. You can be forced to live in solitary confinement because nobody else will get the vaccine. All of these things can happen, but you have to see a doctor. There are times you're just going to have to see a doctor. Doctors have to, it's part of the job. They have to be ready for that, and that means they're going to have to be vaccinated. So are the nurses, because they're working with people that this could kill very easily. Why? Because those are the people who end up in the hospital. If you're doing open heart surgery with someone and you have COVID, there may be complications, to say the least. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned before about, they're it's so bizarre, they're willing to take horse dewormer and urine and monoclonal antibodies, so all sorts of and so they're willing to take plenty of pharmaceutical products that they don't know what's in it, but not this fucking vaccine. And I'm just kind of I reached the point. I saw a meme on Facebook about a week ago. It said, "Fine, go ahead, drink urine." Like, I don't, I stopped caring about them. I know, because unfortunately, there's not much we can do about them, other than to try to keep them as isolated away from us as possible. So if they got a death wish, I mean, they are part of a death cult anyway. So if they want to take it to its natural conclusion, bye, bye kids.
Oh, well, I did tell you, I think I told you this too. We had read off the Mayo Clinic the side effects of, what was it? The first drug that he was pushing, Trump was pushing, that hydroxychloroquine. And the side effects, and aside from instant blindness and a whole bunch of others, which actually occurs far more frequently than you'd think, the reason people take this is because they really don't have a choice by this point. If you're taking it, you've got a serious problem already, and it's sort of like, okay, the risk of just immediate blindness is. But one of the side effects, I shit you not, was no respiration and no pulse. That was. And it's just like, okay, you just don't want to say causes death. So they're just like, no pulse. They didn't say lack of perceivable pulse or low pulse or indetectable pulse. They said no pulse. So they are admitting you're dead and no respiration.
Technically, you're not dead just because your heart stopped, because you're not dead until your brain.
You're dead. They can maybe bring you back, but give me a break.
But yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. And so again, some people said, "Oh, well, that's mean." No, it's not mean to say that. Especially considering that they have the attitude that, well, whatever happens to you is your fault, right?
So you're taking the conservative position on one front on this, right? I mean, listen,
exactly.
We all know that people on welfare don't want to work, and we know that people who and if those are the arguments that people are gonna put forward, and certainly not all conservatives, and but we have a pretty good example of someone who doesn't make that argument, but we've all heard that. Repeatedly, so I don't want to sort of strawman people, but on the flip side, right. we see a lot of that, and we see some pretty nasty arguments about how people need to take care of themselves, and if you're too stupid to get X, Y, and Z done, you need to suffer the consequences. And sort of like, okay, if you think injecting bleach is smarter because your president said it, which I really can't. I mean, he fucking said try it. He said, have we considered looking into that? Maybe that'll work. We should give that a shot. I mean, that's what he said, but that's saying try it. And if people sat there and said, okay, I could take a vaccine that's gone through three-phase clinical trial that has been tested as much as we can on animals, and many people have taken, and most people have had absolutely no problems with. Or I can inject bleach. Let's roll the dice, man.
Well, exactly. I mean, as I've often said to people, I can judge people based on my morals and values or theirs. And if anything, if I'm using their standard to judge them, as long as I'm not strawmanning them, that, if anything, that's even more fair, because you could argue, well, why are my morals and values superior to theirs, right? But if I'm going to use I'm going to take the same thing that they apply to everybody else that they don't like and apply it back to them. So to me, it's totally fair, because that's their standard. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't go well for them, well, what does that say? That either says that their standard's really bad, or they're really stupid, or a combination thereof, or dishonest. I guess it could be that. Because especially if they don't want, if they don't want that standard applied to them, then they're dishonest, because basically they want one for me and a different one for thee. So then that supposed standard that they have doesn't really exist. It's just something they want to impose on other people. And then, in which case, then double fuck them, because they clearly, they don't care. They just want to use that as an excuse to kill, to let other people suffer. So, and again, I've said before, the fact that, because I don't know what the numbers are now, but at least as of like 3-4 weeks ago, like 7% of Democrats were unvaccinated and 40% of Republicans were unvaccinated. And that because people unvaccinated are dying at a much higher rate, it's going to start affecting close races. So, hey, if they want to trike themselves out into losing the election, by all means, jackass, go right ahead.
Well, and that is actually kind of really no joke. I mean, Florida, for 2000 was determined by literally hundreds of votes, and if you had something like this going through Florida at the time, that would have swung the election. Those kinds of number differences. So yeah. And
this reminds me, speaking of Florida, I'm glad you brought Florida up. So now DeSantis is upset because the CDC has withdrawn certain types of the monoclonal antibody treatments.
Yes.
Because they have proven not to be effective in multiple clinical trials.
And this is
so they say, hey, look, it's not a guess.
It doesn't work.
These are clinical trials, and we tried to use it, and it didn't do anything in a controlled study. So therefore, it doesn't work. So they withdrew their conditional. And that's the other thing too. I think it's kind of funny. When the CDC had the FDA had the conditional approval for the vaccine. Oh, well, it's experimental. We can't take it because it's experimental. Then, of course, once they approved it, they still don't want it. But this was basically something that was just done on an experimental basis, and they had no problem with that. But then when it proves not to work, and so DeSantis is angry. Of course, as it turns out, both he and friends of his have financial interest in the companies that make the monoclonal antibodies. So this guy's literally willing to kill his own citizens so he can make a few bucks.
Well, I'd like to point out two things. Which, first of all, this reminds me of Texas now requesting money to assist with the overwhelming number of COVID cases they have, and I'm sitting there going like, well, wait a minute, isn't sort of based on the conservative position that you need to pay the consequences, especially in light of moral hazard. You have to pay the consequences. You rolled the dice saying we're not going to do anything, really anything to protect ourselves. Oops, it's not working. Now we want to be bailed out by everybody else. I think that's the same argument that they've used when other states wanted it. But I want to quickly do, because it sounds like you want to say something. I do want to hear it, but I want to say this too. You're actually slightly wrong on the monoclonal. I can never pronounce that, but they do work.
Monoclonal antibodies.
Yes, they do work. They absolutely work on Delta. They have no efficacy on Omicron. So one of the reasons they have to pull it is because people are still getting Delta. Delta is still being detected, and it can save the lives of people who have Delta. So if you give it to somebody who's got Omicron, and we know for a fact it will not work, and we're losing efficacy because Omicron is already by far the dominant one, but people are still getting Delta, and it is still saving lives with Delta. We don't have a lot of it. So they're pulling it to take it from a group we now know for a fact it has no efficacy. It's not that it works a little bit. It's not, there's no efficacy against Omicron. We don't know why, but we know it does not work against Omicron. We know it has a decent, it's still not great. It's only like 30 or 40%, but it has an efficacy, and it's a life-saving efficacy. If you're in real trouble, it can save your life so long as you've got Delta. So they are pulling it for hospitals that still need it. There is a shortage of it for hospitals in regards to Delta, and he wants to use it for people who are infected with Omicron. And it's like, no. Period. End of discussion. And he's upset about that. It's like, excuse me.
Thanks for the clarification. Now, the other thing too, also, what really comes down to it. Now, obviously, he has got financial interest, but what it really comes down to, it's all part of his political narrative. So, if that gets pulled, because he was supposed to put out the thing. See, we don't need vaccinations because we have, Regeneron. But it doesn't actually. So they're taking it away, or no, they're not taking it away from people who will actually help. They're trying to, like you said, reserve it for the people who will help. But yeah, that doesn't fit his narrative, so he doesn't like that. And again, I'm like, tough luck, dude. Tough luck.
Well, he's up for re-election too, and I think he's eyeing, okay, if he sits there and says, "Hey, your state's got you covered. We're going to have all of these things out here," and he thinks it's political, and it's like, it's not political. The people who wrote these studies, the people who tried the clinical trials, weren't sitting there saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be great? Why don't we just fudge the clinical trial this way because it'll be good, or bad politically for, the governor of Florida." That's really not how it works. And that's why there's peer review. That's why all of this stuff is done in the open. That's why people can look at it, comment on it, and even repeat the results themselves in their homes if they would like to. That's how it works. There's nothing hidden here, and it's explicitly to avoid that kind of problem. Well, it does happen on rare occasion. We know that. We've seen it. It's safe enough that you can presume that calculation was not made until otherwise demonstrated reasonable cause to believe. And I'm telling you right now, we know it works for Delta. We have anecdotal and now real evidence that it does not work for Omicron. Save it for Delta. I wish thinking that, hey, it might help in the one shot in a billion. We don't know and probably won't. And let's save thousands instead of that one shot. So, yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But you didn't know that. You're perfectly calm. You're yeah. No, nobody here is triggered. Oh, dear Lord. Well, and I'm triggered. Just as an aside, because I said this earlier. Show off my Latin. Just obviously not. Latin is not one of the ones I learned. I just have the basics you'd need for law. But I said this earlier. I did, in fact, during the 82 days when the Senate was holding up the Garland nomination, every single day I tweeted a thought to Obama. It was different every day. It was all based around one concept. It's a Latin phrase, que tacit consentire videtur, which is he who does not speak is what is it? He who does not speak. Sorry, I got distracted. He who does not speak is assumed to consent. Silence implies consent. That's the silence implies consent. He has to get consent. It's not that they even have to. He has to get consent from the Congress. Now, he asked Congress, and he said to the Senate, "I would like your consent to put Garland on the court." Now, he only has to wait a reasonable period of time. If they choose not even to reject him, well, by that legal principle that silence implies consent, they haven't rejected him. He gave them 2.5, almost 3 months. If they don't reject him, that's consent. He's on the Supreme Court.
I'd have to look. I don't know. I'd have to look at the Constitution, at the process.
Well, it doesn't say it in the Constitution, but it does say consent. And we've argued legally and through the Supreme Court what constitutes consent. And silence is often assumed to imply consent. That's one reason why somebody can't say, "Well, I didn't go along with the Nazis." Yeah, but you didn't say anything either, and silence implies consent. It's a well-established legal precedent. So my argument was, and a few other people ended up making this argument. It was a little bold, I think, for Obama. I don't think he was interested in doing that, but you gave him 2-3 months. If they've said nothing, not even a no, that implies consent. Just put them on. Just have them show up to work one day. Because they don't, it's actually, that doesn't matter. At any rate, that was.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a stretch.
Listen, At that point, it's worth the legal battle. If McConnell is going to set the precedent that any standing Senate can just, without a vote, just stall it until the next. How are we ever going to elect another person to the Supreme Court if there's a majority always willing to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a big problem because basically it's very clear that the Republicans don't give a fuck about what the rules are, and it is very hard playing a game where you're playing by the rules and the other side isn't. So yeah, I don't know that I have an answer for that. But one other thing too, I want to say about Florida. I forgot about this. So DeSantis is supporting a bill that basically would prohibit schools from teaching things about our history that make white people uncomfortable.
I really hope you read that wrong. I haven't heard this. No. I'm really hoping you read that wrong. I'm not confident you did, but I'm really hoping that there's nuance to that.
Let me see. Florida advances bill that would make banning making white people feel bad about racism. And no, it's not a joke. Let me see here.
I'd heard something about that. I mean, the tagline always can say whatever it wants.
It would a bill backed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis that would prohibit public schools and private businesses. How the fuck they can do private business? I don't know. But from inflicting discomfort on white people during lessons or training about discrimination. Was proved by the state Senate's Education Committee. So,
I have concerns about those in general, but I don't think you can distill it to, hey, if somebody's uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable. Listen, I've been there. Okay, there hasn't been a training.
Discomfort's the term that they actually use them.
No, I understand. That's why I'm sitting there. I mean, discomfort means a lot, and there's somebody. There has not been a human resources meeting, a meeting held by human resources in any place I've worked, by the way, and that's important for an extremely esoteric reason that probably only one person that I know of can possibly understand. I have never had a meeting held by human resources that wasn't uncomfortable for somebody there. If it's comfortable, you don't need to have human resources meeting. Firings are uncomfortable for human resources and everybody involved. It doesn't mean that. Oh, yeah, okay.
I mean that's the thing. So it's just, and once again, it's like, well, but again, if we were to try to pass a law that said, well, we can't have teachings that make minority people feel discomfort, and actually that's their whole anger about wokeness is all about trying and you have no right to be to not be offended. They love to say that until they're the offended ones. And the fact of the matter is, and I've said this many times. We will never solve the problem of racism or sexism in this country until, respectively, white people and men are universally willing to have uncomfortable conversations. Because basically it's and the thing, what's really funny about it, it's like when you bring this up and there's this defensiveness, like you're trying to make me feel bad. No, I'm not. If I'm not trying to make you feel bad about people's actions of the past. However, if your actions are really shitty, then you should feel bad about those. Again, I'll bring up another video that Bo, the Fifth Column, did. He basically it distilled down to when it was talking about history, like, why are you identifying with the bad guys? If you're identifying with the Confederates, if you're identifying with the KKK or the Nazis or any of these fucking people, you're identifying with the bad guys. Why are you so invested in the bad guys? Because I don't care what anybody said. I know a lot of Southerners, like, they try to say, oh, it's just heritage. Well, it's a bad heritage, because we know, regardless of the lost cause myth, we know based on the declarations of secession of all except like one of the seceding states, that their main reason for doing this was to preserve slavery. So now, not everybody who fought in the war had a slave and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what the secession was all about. And they fought to not be Americans. That's the other thing. They're not American heroes. They fought to not be Americans. They might be Confederate heroes, but they're not American heroes. So this idea that we're somehow and look, I'm sorry if your great grandpappy did something that makes you sad or makes you feel bad. Germans have to deal with the same shit. And for that matter, Japanese, because we always, whenever we're talking about atrocities, we forget about what Japan did in China and Korea.
And everybody does somewhere down the line. I mean, and you can take a look at the atrocities anywhere between what we did with the Japanese internment camps to Native Americans, and so I mean, there isn't anybody who far enough down the line their ancestors aren't really pretty much soaked in blood, so right. It's not.
Exactly. So rather than worry about whether someone's trying to make you feel guilty, it's like, well, what are they trying to say? What are they upset about, and how do you deal with that? Because again, the same thing is why I brought sexism up too. I'm a man. Have I said or done sexist things? Fucking A, yeah, I have. In retrospect, I look back at it and go, oh shit, that wasn't so hot. Those things I said and did weren't so cool. So I know better now. Am I running around feeling guilty and flagellating myself over it? No, I'm just trying to do better. That's all it's really ever about. But so it's, to me, the people who feel that discomfort, that feel that guilt, they're not feeling guilty because somebody a long time ago did it. They're doing it. They're feeling it because they identify with those people that did those bad things, and that's the problem.
So I'd like to address something that is Andring said, and this is the key, and it hinges on this, because with the Supreme Court, there is a separate clause about the Supreme Court that has nothing to do with the justices. And so what Andring said, and this is where it gets cute. This is where the legality gets cute. But what Andring said was that the Senate does not consent to the president's nomination; they confirm. That's actually not true. That seems like it should be true, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to school Mr. Isandering for a minute on the Constitution, because, I just think, I kind of wish we had more patriotic.
I gotta stop you, because all the federal judges that have been appointed have all been confirmed by the Senate. They're actually called confirmation hearings.
They have, but there's a separate clause regarding the Supreme Court in the Constitution. It does not say confirm for judges of the Supreme Court. It is Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, which says the president shall nominate and by and with advice. Okay, well, advice just means they say, we'd like you to do this, this, and this, which they did, and plenty of people do, and consent of the Senate. The word in the U.S. Constitution, sir, is consent, not confirm, when it comes specifically to judges of the U.S. Supreme Court. This means that since by precedent previously established that, in fact, silence can and often does imply consent, if he gave the U.S. Supreme Court 3 months and they did not respond, that implies consent, and I think he, at that point, had the right to appoint.
I think you're still wrong, because Clause 2 is where they make treaties, and we don't. Treaties just don't happen because the Senate didn't bother to ratify or to reject. I think you're conflating consent from one frame to another, and that's one thing I've learned from watching a lot of legal videos over the last few years. That and this is the problem that sovereign citizens run into, because they look at, like driving is defined in one statute of the law as one way, but that's only for that particular statute and not for everything else. And then they all run around thinking they don't need a license because I'm not driving, but they are driving. They're just not They're just not commercial. They're looking at something that was defined for commercial use, and they're not doing that, so they think they're off the hook. I'm sorry. I gotta say, I think if you ran it up against a constitutional lawyer, I think they would tell you were wrong.
Well, okay, but on the flip side, since this does imply that the Senate is required to act and they chose not to, my argument is, if they decide that they are not going to reply, then either the reading of this demands that they in fact do in something by a timely manner, or it means consent. And if it in fact means consent and they are not required to, I'm just saying, if Mitch McConnell can pull what he did and think that it's legally justifiable, I don't think this argument is a greater stretch than his by any stretch of the imagination.
But the thing is, you're going by, well, we don't like what they did, so therefore I'm going to do something to get around it. It's admirable, but I don't think you have a leg to stand.
Nick, it's admirable that you're trying to screw people with the legal process and by equivocating over individual language. But
I don't think you have a leg to stand on, because again,
that was my argument. I stand.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do. I stand by it, and I tweeted
You can stand by it,
at,
but I would
him
put money
every
on it.
single day. Silence implies consent. It says consent in the Constitution. As Andring will tell you, the Constitution was written by and inspired by God.
And where
I think I got a position.
and where in the Constitution does it say silence is consent?
It does not, but that is accepted legal precedent. So silence does in fact is usually.
I would bet you that if you go up to a woman and say, I'm gonna grab your tits, and she says, and she doesn't say anything, and you grab her tits, I would bet you're going in jail.
Okay, I will tell you, I think we've committed what's called a category error, and I think these are two different classes of issues. But I do very much concur with you, and I think you've got a straight up legit point. All right,
yeah.
So moving on,
and actually, Sandra used a very similar argument to what I just said. And I agree with it. Yeah, once again, I agree with it. It's Andrew on something. I don't know.
I know in the last 7 days that's happened 3 times now. I honestly think this is the 7th seal. This is why I keep the Bible to look at, because I swear to God, the two of you were in there, and lo, they agreed, and in rode the rider on a pale horse. I think that's it. I think it's over. The two of you are just, dear Lord. All right.
Well, two things. One, Porpoise, I'm pretty sure Nick was joking about the God part. And secondly,
yes.
Well, here's one thing that Sandra and I will always disagree on. So maybe this is why society hasn't collapsed, and dogs and cats aren't living together and all that. is that Andrew comes from it's from that libertarian school of thought that if it doesn't expressly say in the Constitution that the government can do, that the federal government can do something, that they can't.
Yeah.
And that's generally not how it's written. The most of the articles just define how the functions of the government, and then the articles limit the power of the government in specific ways. But just because it doesn't say that it can do something doesn't mean that it can't. But it does specifically say in the article, in the Bill of Rights and the other articles, amendments, that what the government cannot do in order to preserve people's rights. So. I will probably always disagree on that.
If honestly though, I will say this: if you and Xandring end up like really good friends, and you're like, oh, listen, man, we disagree, but black and white, living in harmony, the whole 9 yards. I'm gonna find a new show. You guys can keep this one. I'm just gonna be like, I'm bailing. Bye.
Well, Xandring's not a bad guy. I mean, we'll disagree on certain fundamental things, but I mean, he's not a douchebag and he's not evil. And that's really, and this is the thing, what I just want to say real quick, that I may have mentioned this. I've said this in other streams. I don't know if I've said it in this one before, but I'll say it again if I have. That when people say to me, if I unfriend somebody or if I block somebody or whatever, and they'll say like, oh, you would end a friendship over a simple disagreement. No, I wouldn't. A simple disagreement is like, what should the tax rate be, or what should the limits of government, or whether jalapeno poppers should have cream cheese or cheddar, pineapple on a pizza or not, Stones versus Beatles, there's a whole bunch of things like that. And even tax, what should the tax rates be, and all that? We can get into that, and what's the limits of various rights and so forth, and where do they come from? We can disagree on all that. But when it comes down to fundamental differences of values, that's where I draw the line. I don't think Sandra and I have a fundamental difference in values. We have different view on how they should work, but at the end of the day, he thinks that everybody should have the same rights as everybody else, and and all that. And he doesn't, and all that. So, and he believes in a cooperative society. He has more limits on how cooperative that'll be than I would, but that's okay. That's a valid point.
The two of you, as he would say, I think the two of you actually agree mostly on the problems and at least morally what the solutions are, that we need to fix these things, but just disagree on the best way to get there. So,
exactly,
I think that's a good way to put it. All right. Well, before we just keep going on all of this here. So, what have we got left? I actually think we hit everything that was in the rundown. The Garland one, the nomination. I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter about the Garland thing at all. I'm certainly not. I'm not arguing with everybody about esoteric rules, because I was really fucking pissed off, and that Mitch McConnell is I won't even say it. I won't say that he is the spawn of Satan. And no, I'll stay away from all of that, as true as it may be.
I think if you did, I think you'd owe Satan an apology.
I probably would. You're right. I would owe McConnell an apology, and I will. He'll get that when I was going to say a cold day in hell, or when he sees me in hell. But all right. So, McConnell. I swear to God, he really. Aside from creepy and all this other stuff, it's just what he's willing to do, and the level of cynicism is unprecedented, I think, basically since even Machiavelli had standards. I'll be quite honest with you. This isn't even Machiavelli sitting there going, this is fucked up. All right.
Well, I'll just add my one comment on McConnell is what I've said. Well, I don't know if I've said it here before, but if I have, I'll say it again. Something from Charlie Chaplin, a piece of wisdom. As long as men die, liberty will never perish.
I like that one.
That's all I have to say.
All right, so I think we're basically at that, and I don't even think that really requires any more time. It was just worth they're trying to drag Trump into court for the 9/11. For the January 6th, and I honestly, what the judge said, and for the most part, I'm like, look, if you want to bring a witness to the stand and the relevant, bring a witness, and if he's the witness, he's the witness. But the reality is, all they're going to testify to is not any conversations they had with him, but stuff that he said on television and how they interpreted it. Well, that you don't need him for that. So as much as I relish the idea of making his life miserable by dragging him into 700 separate court cases to testify as to what he said and what he meant, is not legally relevant. We all know what he said and saw, and if you don't know, you can put it up on, you can bring it in. What he meant is actually completely irrelevant for this part of the trial and for this kind of trial. It may be relevant later, but right now it's not. He said X, Y, Z. You thought it meant that you should storm the Capitol. So, why are you going to call Trump? That's insane. So I'm really glad that the
funny part about it is basically if just say Trump were to do something stupid like that, which he is stupid, so you never know. But basically, he's trying to get Trump to say, well, that Trump told him to do it. So if the president gives you an order, it's not illegal, which of course that's not true either. But it would be funny, because if he's actually arguing that Trump gave him an order to do this, that's exactly what Trump's trying to say that he didn't do. So it actually kind of provides evidence against Trump.
Trump. I know Trump. You'd think would never do this, but he's becoming less and less relevant and more desperate. And that NPR thing is just so. I half expect him to demand to testify. Like, I want to tell my side of the story. It's like, dude, this isn't about you. Okay.
You're goddamn right. I did.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's that, which of course I get, and the cats and dogs. I was just like, oh dear Lord. Bill Murray, of course. Bill Murray is awesome. He's hilarious. I don't think he's like the best and funniest comedian out there, and I'm saying this in full knowledge of our audience, and that there's some people there who, for some reason, just think he's just the best. I mean, he's good, but at any rate, all that aside, and realizing that I'm going to pay for that one. Moving forward, is there anything else that we can hit? I think that's about it. I
think that's about it. I just want to say I'm glad you got my Colonel Jessup reference.
I did. Aaron Sorkin is the greatest writer, I think, and anyone who hasn't seen every single Aaron Sorkin thing he's ever written, from Sports Night through well past that, I just you're not welcome on this show, quite frankly. And
that's the reason why, like, back when Trump, the second time Trump was being impeached, and there was some talk about, well, would Trump appear? And I was like, oh, please, because again, we would have got a Colonel Jessup moment. You're goddamn right, I did.
You're goddamn right, I did. Oh, dear Lord. Which is even the better than I know it's the you can't handle the truth line that everybody loves, but that's not the one. It's the goddamn right
exactly.
I did.
You can't handle the truth is a good line, but you're goddamn right I did. That's because that's the ball game right there.
Well, it's not only the ball game, but that shows just the line of thinking. Of course, I did what you, as a coward, are incapable of doing. Which, whether that's true or not, that's what he's thinking.
And this is what men of hubris always do. That basically, again, they can't not, because they think they're brilliant and they think what they did was right and righteous. So at a certain level, they want to say, of course I did it because that's the right thing to do.
And they want that to be what exonerates it. So even if it's illegal, even if he shouldn't have done it, everybody somewhere in their heart knows that he was right to do it. At least that's what he believes, and that's where, yeah.
Well, and to that, actually, let's continue for more minutes, because actually along those lines, Trump's lawyer, one of his lawyers, the other day, basically admitted to the whole, coming up the slate of fake electors to try to substitute. And he said he just laid it on. Yeah, we were there to, in case it came up, in case he was able to do that, we could substitute, which again is completely illegal. Like, dude, you just admitted to multiple felonies. And again, that was his, you're goddamn right I did moment. And I was like, what? Whoa, and again, because this is what people of hubris do, because when they think they're righteous, they can't help but to say it. And so actually one of Trump's own lackeys did it, which is why I have zero doubt if Trump ever gets on the stand related to any of this, he's gonna blurt it out because he can't not do it.
He's done it already. I mean, how many times has he been in a deposition? My favorite one is like, well, wait a minute, you're nobody knows what you're worth here, and why is that? Oh, well, my net worth changes, of course, with the markets and with what people are thinking at the time, and to be quite honest, what I'm feeling at any given moment. And it's just sort of like, wait, what the fuck did you just say? Your net worth changes based on what you're feeling, and that was what he said. I mean, it's in the deposition, it's on paper.
And apparently, in a filing last in 2020, he only had $93 million cash. Now, mind you, that's not all somebody's. Well, that's like, so he's like, no, doesn't mean he only has $93 million is still a lot of money. But as far as cash, only $93 million in liquid assets.
And that may not include, we don't know what, I mean, if that doesn't include the Deutsche Bank debt, which I assume it probably doesn't, because some of that debt appears to be off the books.
That's cash on hand. So that does not include any debts. So he's in trouble, and because that would mean that he would at the very least have to sell off some hard assets to liquidate some, so he'd have the cash to make those payments. All
right, we need someone to deal with Jason. Jason, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have a pineapple on pizza. So it's all mods on deck. I think Science Ultimatum. Sorry,
yeah,
Jason, I love you, buddy.
To block him, but
Well, what else are we gonna? I mean, we can't flog him. I don't think. I mean, capital punishment for pineapple on pizza. I mean, it's close, but we'll think about it.
It's tempting. It's tempting.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we are having absolutely the appropriate response in this live chat. Thank you for clarifying, Titan.
There is such thing as timeout, which doesn't remove him permanently. This gives you a 5-minute, timeout.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, if I had a timeout, it would be like 3-4 hours. Well, 3 or sorry, I was going to say 3 or 4 years, but okay.
Yeah, but you can just keep doing it though.
Okay. I think we have a solution. We have a solution. All right, Jason, thank you so much for stopping by.
When he was in the Army, they were trying to get rid of punitive or reduced punitive punishments for the push-ups and everything, because some guys said they had gotten sick or bad things happen. So a friend of mine when he was in basic training, he had some GI from Arkansas, and what the guy would do is he'd give you 10 at a time. He'd go, give me 10. You do the 10. He'd go, give me 10, and just do that 5 or 6 times until you got the requisite number of push-ups.
I only gave him 10. Okay, great. That's clever. All right. And you think I'd have a problem with my... Oh, give me a break. I could totally go silence implies consent. I'm sorry. I totally could have. He should have given it a shot. It cost him nothing, and they were being fucking dicks. All right. Excuse me. Sorry. I'll watch my language. What the fuck? I really I loathe McConnell. There are very few people I actually say I loathe about, and he is absolutely unabashedly one of them.
He might have been able to do a recess appointment.
Yeah, he might have actually, and that could have. But no, but they decided they weren't going to go. Oh God, not her too. No, please no. At any rate, sorry, just half the live chat. We just lost half the live chat. All right. So hopefully the mods are circling the wagons. We'll be okay. We'll be okay. That's just, I'm going to hold myself and say it's okay. Pineapples are good. Pizza's good. You just don't keep them off of each other and everything's going to be fine. So, I think there's a couple of things we could have done. Unfortunately, Obama had this little thing called ethics, and it just really, that can fuck you up in Washington.
Yeah.
Oh, dear Lord. All right. Well, and I just realized I like having this, I love the boom mic and I love having it here, but now I just realized I keep tilting my head towards it and then nobody can see half my face, which who knows, maybe is a bonus depending. But, all right, so let's wrap this up. We are going to be, next week on Tuesday, we are going to have Dr. Todd. That's right. Dr. Todd is going to be back to discuss fallacies. He's written a book on fallacies. Apparently, my contribution is now going to be included, and I'm going to be in the credits for the Tinkerbell effect, which you had never heard of before, which it's not a common one, but it's there. A technical fallacy, but nonetheless. But we're going to have him back. We're going to talk about all sorts of fallacies, and as Andrew really wanted to pick his brain about that one, and I'm looking forward to having him back because he's a really smart guy. So, and he knows a lot about why we screw up just sort of even every day thinking. So, thank you. Jesus, wow. The trolls tonight. It is just getting fucking vicious. All right. So, thank you all very much. Yep.
Yeah, and at least, okay, the pineapple on pizza thing is bad, but at least they weren't trying to put mayonnaise on pastrami.
Never even heard that. I don't even want to ask. I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
If you do that, a rabbi is allowed to come out and hit you with a stick.
And thus started the war between Greece and Israel. At least, not Greece. Oh, Jesus, wow, I'm getting tired. Egypt and Israel. Egypt. That was it. Yeah. I think that was what I heard. It was the pastrami thing. Mayo and pastrami, and all of a sudden Egypt, and it just goes right after Israel for that. So, All right, folks. Thank you all very much, Joe. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you next week. I'm sorry, I know you and I were going to hook up this weekend, but we're getting bombed. I guess we're getting a snow bomb, a weather bomb. I don't know what it is, but it sounds. I mean, we're going to need a snow tornado, snow-a-cane. I don't know, but it's just that they're running out of. It's getting crazy. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see. Actually, no, I forgot. I think we're going to be doing After Dark this Friday, and we're doing them a little more sort of as a on need basis. But I know that from our last show, a lot of people wanted to talk about that. I would love to talk about that. I think Xander wants to talk about that. So I think we're looking at After Dark on Friday. Either way, Tuesday in time, fallacies with Dr. Todd, returning guest. And if you look at our last show, that was just a blast. He really, he's going to make you think about why you really don't think. And it's a really good guest. Looking forward to it. So thank you again, Joe. Thank you so much for coming. And we will see you all next week or Friday, depending.
Yeah.
Welcome to In Time. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. We read all your comments, and if you like this video, please don't forget to share.